Thank you very much. From the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Ali Yurtsever for arranging this opportunity for me to engage with some of Chicago's community. A dear friend of mine on my second trip to Chicago many years ago told me Chicago is at the core of America. What works here can work anywhere in the United States. And indeed, you here at AIC work within the core of that core, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege. So thank you very much for coming out on a Friday evening to listen to me. As you might know, I came from Cairo the day before yesterday. And I've been based there and in the Middle East since just before the revolutions began in December 2010. The idea behind shifting there from Oxford in that winter that now seems so long ago was to enjoy a sabbatical from the hustle and the bustle of British politics and enjoy a very quiet, non-eventful Cairo, where it's obviously very boring. Didn't work out quite the way I planned. A few weeks after I arrived in Cairo, the revolution began in Tunisia, and a few weeks later, because Egyptians can't be beaten by Tunisians, they had to have a revolution themselves. And they did that on the 25th of January in 2011. On that day, the people of Egypt began to descend onto the streets and call for the downfall of the regime of Mohammed Hosni Mubarak. The repercussions of that day, I think, are extremely significant, but much further than beyond Egypt. Egypt is a hugely significant country in the region, and by extension in global geopolitics. Around a quarter of all Arabs live in Egypt. Its cultural impact can be felt all across the region. It houses the Azhar University, which affects Islamic education worldwide. Its peace treaty with Israel is key to the regional security order. If Egypt comes through its transition well, it will have a spin-off effect in many places. And likewise, if it comes out of it badly, the repercussions are going to be felt. Now, much has happened since those first days of the revolution in 2011, and Egypt today stands in the midst of a very delicate part of its transition. To understand more comprehensively the nature of that period, of what we are living in now, I thought it pertinent to pick on a single event which took place recently and draw from that different angles and aspects of what has happened and what is happening. Think of it as a single rock in a pond which ripples outward, and the ripples themselves explain a great deal as to where Egypt actually is. And that recent event is the attempt by President Mohamed Morsi to dismiss the Prosecutor General of Egypt, who had been appointed by the former regime and is perhaps the most senior remaining stalwart of the Mubarak regime still in existence. And there's no other way to describe the outcome of that attempt except as an extremely embarrassing defeat, a defeat that even pro-revolutionary forces were very pleased about. How? Why? And what does that say about the future? Over the last 18 months, following the 25th of January, a good deal, I think, has taken place. The head of the regime, Mr. Hosni Mubarak, was forced to resign by the military establishment from which he had emerged, and under the aegis of a junta, presided over by a field marshal. There were relatively free elections for parliament and the presidency. Not too long after the newly elected president took office, the regime opted to depart from the governing arena, and the military indicated to the presidency that it would return to the status quo prior to the revolution. That status quo would mean the end of the governing junta, which had hitherto essentially shared the function of the presidency with the elected president, and its return to the privileged quasi-state within a state position it had previously held. At least in terms of affairs not related to foreign policy, defense, and the military's budget, the elected president would have free rein to engage with state institutions to try to institute and implement his platform. It's really important, I think, to recall at this juncture precisely what sort of victory the newly elected president actually had. The first round of the presidential elections earlier on this year saw a turnout of about 43% of the electorate.